Welcome to episode 3 of Career Podcast. Today we have with us Wanphrang Diengdoh, filmmaker, storyteller, and there are a lot of things which we get to know about all these things. Welcome, Wanphrang, to this Career Podcast, which is aimed at benefiting students and youth of Meghalaya. How did you discover that you're a filmmaker and a storyteller? Because why am I asking is that whenever I do career counseling sessions, people are struggling. The students are struggling to find out what they really want to do. So discovering yourself is extremely difficult, and you have the right education for it also. You have done mass journalism, mass communication and all that. So did it help? And then how did you discover that you want to be a filmmaker before you did all this? I think you discovered before.
Thank you very much for having me here this morning. It's always lovely to be in Meghalaya, to be in Shillong, and to be able to share some of these stories with the people here. I am from this place. It has nurtured my entire creative journey. As far as my discovery is concerned, I would say that I'm still discovering, but I have perhaps found the journey, and that journey, like you rightly pointed out, is making films. I believe that all of us coming from this region, and like I said early on before the interview stuff, that perhaps I might be a little biased because I'm a Khasi person. I come from this place, I think we are genetically programmed to be storytellers, because our entire cultural history, identity, understanding of the world has been passed down from one generation to another through stories, through our oral culture. And I think that I have just taken that tradition and that indigenous knowledge system that I have always had, and use modern tools to express that. And in this case, the film format. And a lot of people ask me why, when did this happen? When did you discover yourself? When did you realize that filmmaking was going to be your thing? I think that it was only after I was in Delhi. I was doing my master's in mass communication and journalism at Jamia Millia Islamia University. And we encountered so many people from all across India, and it was a very, very interesting melting pot. We had people from all kinds of denominations, all kinds of backgrounds, and it was there that I felt that I am from this place. We are special, and these are the stories that we can tell. And if we ourselves don't tell that story, then who is going to tell that story, right? And surely enough, immediately after I graduated, I told myself I'm coming back to Shillong, and I'm going to make a film, come what may. And we did this film, which was about approximately, if I can remember the numbers well, 30,000 rupees. And we borrowed a camera, we requested our friends, we got hold of people who were able to facilitate a space for us to shoot at. And it was such a magical journey, because I remember I was editing this film on a computer that was only meant to play music, In fact, they used to have Winamp and media. And every alternate day, I would take the computer to Police Bazaar. There was a computer fixing shop there. And sure enough, this person was, very kind, and he was fixing this computer for me. And then one day, after going there for about 1 week, every alternate day, and he said, "But what are you doing that this computer of yours is perpetually crashing?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm editing a film, and I've just shot the film on HTV." And the reaction on his face, like, "Are you mad? Why is it that?" But I think that, being able to lug that computer there every alternate day, getting it fixed, it taught me a certain craft, and a reminder that sometimes life will not always be the way that you expect it to be. It just boils down to what you make of it. There will never be an ideal situation in your life to do whatever you want to do, but what tools do you have to further what you want, And I think that being able to work with non-existent resources, being able to work in a state like Meghalaya, which is now slowly able to assert itself in the filmmaking landscape of the country, being able to be part of that journey right from its perhaps, I wouldn't say beginning, but at a stage when digital technology arrived in Meghalaya in the form of small cameras, being able to edit on your desktop, being able to be part of that landscape has meant that it has really enriched my journey. But I think that if anyone has to find themselves, there's a lot of introspection has to be done, and to always treat people the way that you want to be treated. I think before we embark on any creative process or we imagine ourselves to be anyone, be it a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, or I suppose lawyer might be tricky, but what I'm trying to get at is that sense of empathy, to treat people the way that you want to be treated and treating everyone as an equal. And Meghalaya Shillong is a perfect practicing ground to enhance that sensibility.
Okay. But you already started mass journalism when you discovered this. But how were you in school? Did you have this thing that I want to, do dramatics, or I want to I make some things, or be creative at something? Did it start at school?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I studied in St. Edmund's School in Shillong, and there was such a huge emphasis speaking English, almost to a point that, you were penalized if you're caught speaking in Kasi by your teachers, you know how it functions in Meghalaya. Speaking English is obviously considered to be of a certain class, and you have to fashion yourself a certain way. But I think I was very, very fortunate because God bless his soul, my father was a very keen storyteller himself. So for example, we would go to Sotra / Chappuchi, and he would tell me these stories about the history of the place, the folk tales and the legends, and I would read those stories in the Kasi language in school, And being a child, my mind was full of this absolute awe of this place that I was coming from. And, and there was that sense of feeling proud, that these are the stories that we have. And, my father's telling me these stories and I'm learning it in school. So it was almost like this double kind of battle, so to say, where I was learning about so much, And then, of course, there was a huge emphasis even in dramatics, it was called, I'm trying to remember the exact event that we had in school. It was called the school contest and then creation week. So every week the students would create things, be it music or craft, and then of course there were the concerts. And at that point of time, the concerts used to be held at Central Library. Having said that, I took part in one school concert, and that was enough for me. But I thoroughly enjoyed being part of the creative landscape in Shillong, even at that age, because there were a lot of bands, there was a lot of music, and obviously, surely enough, like everyone else, I also played music. But we never had role models to fashion ourselves. We never had musicians whom your parents would say, what about that guy? So a lot of parents discouraged us from pursuing the creative field because, like I said, there was no one to mentor, to guide us. There were no role models, And up until I finished my board exams, class 10, or even 12 for that matter, I was still imagining doing music professionally. But this didn't land well with my parents, and I still did it on the side, but I didn't study it professionally. And in a certain way, I'm glad I didn't study it formally, professionally, because I think that sometimes, after a point of time, it's what you do with what you have, even in the creative field, that matters the most, The gathering of knowledge is also important, but at the end of the execution of what you have inside you to create something is equally important. So, and my musical pursuits, at least, formally ended, but I continued playing all sorts of different musical instruments. And I was also fortunate enough because it was a point of time that cameras became very, very cheap, you had like these camcorders, they would call them. And I was, filming all sorts of things, and I'm just being able to document and being able to record this reality that was in front of me. So I think that unconsciously, perhaps, there were these breadcrumbs that were already being thrown in front of me that I just picked up subconsciously and eventually arrived at a destination, so to say, at least point of time with regards to being able to want to do what I'm doing right now. Having said that, I studied science. I studied biotechnology. And I remember the day that I told myself, right, maybe this is not for me. It was you had to dissect leeches and frogs and, study all the nerve endings and synapses and all this kind of insect anatomy to get a better understanding of how the human body functions as well. Initially, I found it very fascinating, but I remember not having breakfast one day. The leech was being placed in front of me, and this was in Bangalore. And I think there was probably some conversation that the Leech and I had at that point of time. We were just like, right, but then
Did you go vegan after that?
no. How does anyone go vegan in Shillong? I mean, if anyone can explain that, But I don't overindulge. I like meat, as touchy as subject matter may be. But I think what I'm trying to get at was that now I've come to a point in time in my life where I realized that all of these different facets all come together, So science can work together with arts. Science can work together with other subject matters to arrive at a questioning of things, Ronnie, the questioning of the self, which will further solidify the kind of work that you're doing. But yes, I think Shillong really sowed those seeds, in terms of me being able to do what I want to do. And I'm very, very fortunate in that sense, yeah.
Wonderful. So looking at your resume, you have immense experience in terms of teaching and research also in this particular field. So this is very good. I mean, because you're doing all that and you have teaching experience. So I personally also, when I was preparing for UPSC, I was teaching also, and it helped me a lot to prepare myself, because when you have to teach, you have to be good, right? Because they're gonna ask questions, and if you don't answer, it's very embarrassing. So how did it help you to grow as a filmmaker and a storyteller? In all these, and how many years you did spend in this teaching and research?
I immediately when I finished from university, there was one of these private colleges in Shillong that was opening a mass communication department, and I think journalism, mass communication, one of those, and they were offering me to do a certain number of hours to mentor some students, and I really enjoyed spending time with them because it keeps me on my toes, and I always believe that until and unless you're able to explain a concept to someone, you yourself have not understood it, So, I was also equally fortunate because, like I said, when I was in the university in Jamia, it was a mass communication research center. So we were exposed to a whole lot of academic works. We were exposed to a lot of teaching faculty who were part of prestigious institutions. Like, for example, like Rajiv Lochan, who was the then director of the National Gallery of Modern Arts. He was one of our mentors, and we used to do these beautiful exercises where we would place pieces of paper on thin pieces of paper on a 4x3 or 16:9 frame. And not a lot of people understood why that was being done, But it was an exercise in a lot of things, and more so in terms of composition. And the reason why I'm saying that is I also approach education in a slightly non-traditional way, perhaps a non-colonized way, And I teach students, or rather I guide students to be aware of themselves. So for example, doing a box breathing, being in touch with your emotion, And a lot of education does not stress on that, especially in the creative field, because you just imagine that you watch films and you write about the films. No, that is equally important. But what is more important is that you're able to understand the context of those films. Why did those films? Why were those films made? Why was this particular kind of literature being churned at that point of time? But being able to be with young students, like I said, allowed me to also understand the temperament of what was going on around me. Why is it that they like a certain kind of film? Why is it that they like a certain kind of music? Why is K-pop so fascinating? And I'll give you a very good example. Yesterday I was with my daughter and we were going to Cherrapunji, Sora, and she was playing Korean K-pop music, And obviously I didn't understand a single word. She didn't understand a single word, but it was really landing, So I think being able to be with young people also reignite certain things, especially with regards to the creative aspiration. And then after that, I did a short stint at the EF, English and Foreign Languages University, similarly guiding them with making their documentary final projects. And then I eventually decided that, I want to take a break. I just want to do full-time production, because even in the production process, there's a huge amount of research that goes into the making of the films, because I think that is the meat of what the film is about. You can get your pretty panoramic, full HD, 4K, or even 16K shots for that matter. But if there is no meat in that, they just become ornamental images. So I think that the research is equally important, especially when you're dealing with subject matters that are related to identity, that are related to history. And also more importantly, given the context of Meghalaya, where a lot of this information is not centralized. You don't have like an archive, or you don't have like a particular library that you can go and look through all of it. There is a certain amount of archival activity that is happening, which is extremely promising. But by and large, there's so much potential for young people to do research, especially coming from here, because you can meet an uncle, you can go meet an aunt, you can go meet a grandfather, you can go meet a grand-aunt, who have perhaps heard this story being told to them from one generation to the other. And I think that it is also time that a certain kind of an indigenous-led research narrative is also encouraged, because it's not just reading the books that arrives at the truth. It is also listening and sharing and taking into consideration the entire spectrum of indigenous knowledge out there that will also enrich you. The whole world is doing that. I'll give you a good example. Europe is also, in particular, the Scandinavian countries, they're going back to this whole indigenous knowledge system. It takes an entire village to raise a child. Whereas we grew up like that. We knew everyone in the street. We knew everyone in our neighborhood. And going back to your question, that whole idea that it's extremely important that you have to do research. You have to be able to arrive at the meat of your content before you start preparing the film. But I'll also tell you a funny story, because a lot of my aunts wanted me to do the civil services, because at that point of time it was the go-to thing, right? You either do engineering, or you do medical, or you become a lawyer. So a lot of my aunts would be like, oh, why don't you do the civil services? And it never landed. I never really wanted to do that. And until today, I don't know why. But I look at some of my friends and colleagues from the same profession, and they seem to be more keen to be doing other things. I think it's always that classic context of the grass is greener on the other side. Like, oh, I envy you. I just want to, find time out and write my book, or write a screenplay. I'm just stuck here in the middle of this place, and there's no one around. I was like, can we exchange? I want to be in the middle of nowhere and write, and you can. But yeah, like I said, that's a human condition as well, right? You always aspire, or you always want something that's on the other side. So
Right. Wonderful. So you have done a variety of stuff: fiction, non-fiction, music, videos, etc., etc. Many filmmakers discover a niche and then they stick to it. They want to do more in that. They want to experiment within that and discover maybe deeper levels into that niche. But you have experimented across different genres. So is that a conscious choice, or what is the reason behind? Do you want to experiment more, or you want to stick to a niche?
I think the niche has always been exploring what it means to be from here, exploring this indigenous identity, exploring what it is to be a Khasi. So all of those different forms that I dabble with, be it installation, the installation or for that matter, music video form, the fiction or the non-fiction form, they've always had this underlying current, which is Khasi identity. And I think that it's crucial, especially at this juncture, that we're able to have these difficult conversations, because otherwise someone else comes and tells us that this is how it's supposed to be. I'm not saying that I have all the right answers. I'm saying that it's important that we have those difficult conversations, because a lot of materials have yet to come out there, and we're in transition. Human society, civilization has always been in a state of flux and movement. I agree, but now we tend to imagine that we're all localized. We've never moved from one place to another. That's a very dangerous position to imagine society. So I think that being able to express all of these concepts, and yes, some of them are abstract, some of them are experimental, being able to express all of these things in all these different formats is an equally enriching experience, because sometimes you can't say everything in a film, right? You also have to have that exercise of restraints. All right, this is 1 hour, this is a 92-minute film, this is a 100-minute film, that is it. And after it is out there, after it's being released, it is no longer yours. People will interpret it in the way and form that they wish to, and you have no control or faculty over it. So that's that exercise of being able to work with different forms also means that I have the creative liberty to say all of these things in the music video form. And let's admit it, there've been some crazy music videos that are out there that I've done, and that's part of my journey as well. And I've loved it. It's been fascinating. And I did this installation called Kali Kamai back in 2010. It was commissioned by the Foundation for Indian Contemporary Arts. So, when I think about it, and I remember like getting this grant and doing this installation, which looked at the Shillong local taxi, and I looked at it as this perfect example of a public space where all kinds of identities, be it religious, cultural, political, would come together in a local taxi and engage with one another. So it's an extension of perhaps like the old idea of the Habermas big space, and the French have their coffee, and we've got our local taxis, where people would have all kinds of conversations, and you would accommodate each other. You sat right next to each other, which and you like pretty much squeeze, but people performed, or rather they functioned in that taxi. And I looked at it as a perfect example of the democratic values of Meghalaya and Shillong. So it was quite funny, because when I was trying to explain these things, it was something quite tricky for people to grasp. And I remember like riding this Kalikamai, it's on the internet, you can look it up. And it had like the fabric of the seats were these fabrics that you would find people adorning themselves all across the state, So, and I looked, like I said, this replica or this idea that this is what Shillong is, and also deconstructing the idea that people had to go to an art gallery to see these things, and how you could, the gallery was coming to you, and it was not rooted in any kind of a class hierarchy, because it was a local taxi, and we had conversations that, anonymous conversations that I had recorded of people talking about all sorts of things, like water shortage, no electricity, the rain, and I compiled all of that to make it a representation of the cultural landscape of Meghalaya. So, like I said, if I had to do that in the form of a film, it would probably take me, be like some 5 volumes of films about Meghalaya. But I took an installation and addressed some of these nuances that we find ourselves in the state. Okay. So so I love, and I think that for especially young people are going to be doing films. They have to be equally aware that they'll not be able to always do the film that they want. So how do you have an outlet for all of those other creative ideas? And I think that do music, do music video, do a podcast, do an experimental short film, and don't be burdened with meaning. Because we are so bombarded with all these different images that meaning making has become such a crucial part of the creative process. But sometimes you don't understand why things are a certain way, and we need to be humble and say we don't understand, and that we can also create things that we ourselves don't understand. So, the different forms that I dabble with are all an extension of how I imagine my community.
So since you're open to experimenting with genres, will we ever see a comic feature or a comedy?
Absolutely. I love Kasi humor, it's so, you really have to understand the language and the nuances, but I love Kasi humor. In fact, if Lorni the Flaneur itself has a lot of funny moments in the film where, those 3 guys are sat in the tea stall and they're, taking the mickey out of each other. and the conversations are the kind of conversations that you'd hear out there on the streets. The liberal, the liberal giving away of certain words, like, oh, it's dharma, which is a very complicated term, right? Yeah. And then Adil is sat there and he turns around and he's not quite sure how to react, because he's also going through his own, internal dilemma of what it means to be a Kasi. So, and humor is a good way to, place a mirror in front of society. I think we should laugh at ourselves, we should be able to, have fun and not take our lives too seriously. Life will always be difficult, but I think it's also equally important to remind ourselves that, hang on, it's not that bad, What are different kinds of things that are happening in your day-to-day life that make you smile, And I think that laughter, being able to understand all of those different emotions is crucial for any creative individual. But yes, I think humor is, I'm more than happy to write a comedy film set in Shillong.
Wonderful. Well, my next question is on this film you mentioned, Lorni.
Yeah.
So this is inspired from Shillong, and it's critically acclaimed internationally as well. And so what inspired you to make that? And do awards matter? I mean, how important are awards and recognitions? You have received many, and do they really motivate you further, or that motivation has always been there as a filmmaker?
Yeah, the first part of your question is with regards to Lorni the Flaneur. And I just finished this 92-minute film on the participation of the Khasi laborers during First World War. And it was in 2017, which also marked 100 years of the First World War. And as opposed to the Second World War, where there was a complete understanding of who the baddie was, the First World War was quite complicated. We don't know how it started, what were the reasons. And it's almost a grim reminder of the times we're living in right now, So I was looking at the participation of the Khasi Diengdoh laborers from the state of present-day Meghalaya, and how they were conscripted, how they were taken to the theatres of war in France and then Mesopotamia. And these fascinating stories of these young men going to war, thinking that this is the epitome of what civilization is supposed to be. After all, we were colonized, right? And they imagined that, this is how the West is supposed to be, and this beacon of inspiration for the rest of the world. And when these people got there, they suddenly realized, oh my God, there's killing and bloodshed and so much devastation. So it left a huge mark, And when they came back, they sort of became more aware that they were colonized. So there was one of the, interesting characters that, upon research, I came across the Reverend Shai Rabo Manners, who lived in this village in Sokha. And he wrote this 3-page letter against the British government, saying that you guys can't tax us, And it was this encounter with modernity, this encounter of these people from this part of the world in France and Mesopotamia that really sparked of a certain kind of an imagination of how they want the society to be, one that is not being exploited by the colonial powers. And I discovered quite a huge amount of writings by these people, and they really enhanced the Khasi vocabulary, because certain things that they saw didn't exist in the lexicon of the Khasi language, So, for example, dolphins and all these other animals, all these different kinds of cultural artifacts that they've not been exposed to. So they saw all of these things, and upon coming back, they further enriched our cultural understanding. And this is one advice that I also give young people: see the world, travel, even if it means just down the road to a beautiful hillock somewhere, or just get yourself out of that comfort zone and spend time with other people. Want to know about other people's cultural backgrounds, because that really enriches you yourself as well. So anyways, I had just finished this film and then spent a lot of time filming it across the states, filming across India, France, the UK, as well as Wales. And I told myself that, I want to take a break. I want to do something funny, but I also want to do something that still has some kind of meat to it. And so before we did the casting, I must tell you this. I was looking at my shelf, and there was this graphic novel idea that I had decided I had, taken a break from, that I had finished when I was in Delhi. I just finished university then, and I really wanted to, start making films, and I was getting really restless, and I decided to make this graphic novel. And this graphic novel was this film noir kind of a graphic novel that was set in Shillong, And the idea of this graphic novel was about this boy who grew up watching his father's collection of cassettes, and how that inspired him and his understanding of the world. It got shelved because I landed up doing 1987, the first film that I had made in Shillong. And I decided okay, all right, I want to take a break from this documentary format for a while, the non-fiction format, and work in a fiction film. So I took this graphic novel idea and I adapted it. This was written 10 years before. I'm talking about 2010, and I did Lorni, I think, into it. So 7 to 8 years before. But by then, the Shillong's landscape had changed so much, so I had to recalibrate that graphic novel and make it into a screenplay. And we shot pretty much all of it in Shillong. And we had this casting session, and I was just amazed by the number of young people who wanted to be part of the film. And I tried my best to include everyone, because everyone was fantastic. They were really playing the part, and I met a lot of interesting actors whom I've worked from that point of time till today. One of them is Eliza Barre, and excellent actor as well. And then when it came to the lead, I was looking for a particular kind of a face, and I found one person, and Shillong being Shillong, after a week I couldn't reach out to him anymore. So I sent all sorts of messages trying to get in touch with him, but I suppose he just wanted to be by himself, I suppose. And then our production date was arriving, and I didn't have the lead. And then someone suggested, why don't you speak to Adil? I was like, it's ridiculous. Like, what do you think? I'm a non-fiction filmmaker. I can't afford it. Like, reach out. If you don't ask, you don't get, So I said, all right, let's see how it goes. So I made a quick phone call, and I've met him before, like these film festivals, but it wasn't really it wasn't really a professional, networking conversation. It was, hi, hello. Oh, you're from the Northeast, I'm also from that area and all that. So I happened to be in Delhi at one point of time during the pre-production days. A friend of mine had visited, so I went to Delhi, and I asked Adin if he wanted to meet, like a typical good Shillong boy. I had my screenplay there, I had my pens there, I had the highlighters there, and, I was presenting that I'm a very serious filmmaker. And Adil walks in, and casually, we were having a conversation about everything else apart from the film. And I said, would you be interested in doing some kind of an acting workshop for these people that I've met in Shillong in my casting for the film? And he said, absolutely, I'd love to. And I didn't even have the courage to ask him to play the lead, because in my head, like, kidnap paise manga, like, how much is going to ask? And before he left, he said, you have a copy of the screenplay? I mean, of course, the screenplay was there in front of him. I said, yeah, please. Yeah. And then we said, thank you and bye-bye. And I didn't hear from him 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And then I think about 7 days or a week later, I get a phone call when I'm having chai in Peace Bazaar. I was like hyperventilating, and I pick up the call and I answer the phone outside. Hi, Juan, I've read your script. And I, apart from mentoring these actors that we've selected for the film, I also want to play the lead. And my first reaction was, Adil, I cannot afford you. And then he said something which really reaffirmed what we spoke about earlier on, that journey and that thought process of how you arrive at being a creative. I said, this is for art. I'm like, right, this sounds suspicious, I've been doing music all my life. That's precisely what you say after having like some 5 drinks. This is for art, Right, But I trusted the process, I trusted the moment, and I said, all right, I will be in Shillong and so date. And, we mentored a group of production people as well, who are also doing extremely fascinating thing. I'm told that this is also their space that we're using, right? The Hills people. So we set up this motley crew of graduates from the local St. Anthony's Media College that I also studied at. And then, of course, other people, Tyrell, who had just finished his stint from Xavier's. And we built up this production team and I said, all right, let's see how this goes, And we were able to work from this 100-plus-year-old bungalow right next to the petrol pump in St. Edmunds, if you remember the building. And it was this wonderful space that we utilized for the max, So we built sets there. We had a functioning office from there. And Tyrell, it belongs to Tyrell's relatives, And they were kind enough to not charge us at all. So, they're sorted, And Adil arrived, and the moment he saw this dilapidated, functioning Assam-type bungalow, he was right, all right, this is it, And we had this acting workshop for 10 days, and it was the most beautiful experience ever because, like I said before this interview started, he said, people from this part of the world, that is the whole of the northeastern region, or perhaps indigenous people, he said, their ability to understand abstraction, especially with regards to emotions, is so highly pronounced, They're so in tune with the reality around them. And I think that it's because, and I'm not romanticizing indigenous people, it is our proximity to nature. I mean, we're all urban right now, but 2 generations ago, or even 1 generation ago, every weekend I'd go to the countryside, with my parents. And I think, so we would always visit the countryside, on the weekends. And I think it was us being able to access nature that also enhanced perhaps our understanding of the things around us, And I think that all of the actors who were selected to play the roles, different roles in Lorni the Flaneur, were suddenly reminded that you don't have to be a great actor because you studied in a fancy acting school. Of course, like I said early on, education is very, very important, but it's also what you do with that education that's most crucial. So they were able to really perform the roles that were assigned to them. And I look at Lorni the Flaneur, and every time I look at it now, I find something funny and hilarious that I didn't imagine that point of time, And also, like I said, over and over again, being able to work with limited resources. For example, there was a scene where we required to replicate Shillong Rain, and Shillong Rain itself a character in the film. And we didn't have that rain-making, fancy machine. I was also cautious of not wasting water because it was a very important commodity, especially in Shillong. So we got these mineral water bottles, and we made holes in them with needles, and we filled up water that was collecting from the roof and squeezed those water bottles in front of the camera and in the background, and then it looked like it was real. And then I could see Adil's face like, this is so eco-friendly because, in these big Bollywood films, they just waste so much water, and then the director takes this privilege of doing 15 takes and you've wasted gallons and gallons of water. Water is a very precious commodity, So we were able to, work with whatever we had, and it was such a beautiful, joyful experience altogether. Also because I was able to work with everyone from the state of Meghalaya and Shillong, and the film arrived at different film festivals. It did the whole festival circuit. It's finally found a home in Sony Live, the online OTT platform. And it was a beautiful experience because I also realized that one can make these films that can travel festival circuit, that will eventually find their homes in an OTT platform, that have a certain kind of artistic, creative and technical merit. And all of those films can be made in Meghalaya, And it was such a joyful experience when I, heard the other day that there are a lot of other production companies that have established themselves in Meghalaya, facilitating shoots that are happening from elsewhere. And the government has also released the new Meghalaya filmmaking policy. And I think that is something that investors should also be looking at, because that's a great deal there. I'm jumping at that opportunity myself for my next project. In fact, it's also a film that Adil Hussain himself is in here. And we've been able to film some of it in the UK. It's my first British production, being able to work with a line of British actors who are quite known for what they've been doing. And also at the same time being able to film in some of the locations in Meghalaya. Fascinating, beautiful locations. And I think that we should also capitalize on those locations, because sometimes people from elsewhere just use the location for a backdrop. They don't really improve the economy of the state. And I think that is something that, film tourism is something that the state is also looking into. And I urge young people to get into that space as well, because, who knows the place best than the people from here, right? And there are other supporters from elsewhere who are able to guide and work as consultants and work together, so that we are able to arrive at a state that is able to churn a certain kind of cultural commodity. Filmmaking is a process, is a profession that works with all kinds of departments. So you have to work with the local carpenter, and the electrician, right up to location scouts. So and Meghalaya has that potential, and especially with the oversaturation in the government sector in terms of jobs, this is an avenue that young people could really enjoy. So that's the whole journey about Lorni the Flaneur.
And the second part of the question was
the awards part.
Yeah. How important are they?
I would say that they are important, and it sounds very vain. It sounds like you're just making films to get awards. They are important because it also allows you some kind of recognition. Unfortunately, it allows you to be, fortunately or unfortunately rather, it allows you to do the whole networking thing. It allows you to be able to see how the industry functions outside, so that, at least in the context of Meghalaya, one can get that knowledge and also implement that here, But do awards indicate a certain kind of merit of how great your film is? No. I mean, I look at some of the films that are being churned out and get awards, and they're nothing short of propaganda, and it doesn't indicate that you're a good filmmaker. And when I say good filmmaker, I'm not saying someone who has made a perfectly flawless film. When I say good filmmaker, I'm saying someone who is deeply rooted in that sense of empathy. And I make films and I create art and music because I believe in an equal society. I believe that art should create bridges as opposed to bring them down. I believe that, art should elevate us and our conscience to be better human beings. Art should arrive at us being equals. I do art because I'm a creature of empathy. And it is deeply rooted in any kind of religious text, right? They teach us about empathy and respecting one another. And I think that, for me, a good filmmaker is one that is able to express that, as opposed to technically flawed, or technically unflawed, or a perfectly, well-balanced shot. The technical aspect is important, but as a conceptualizer, one has to be rooted in this understanding of how society should function and survive. We have one world to live in, and unless and until we, live and share this world together, we're in a dangerous place. So,
Wonderful. As an independent filmmaker, how do you balance the artistic vision which you have to the logistical challenges or the finances which are required? You just were talking about how you were, doubting that, whether you can afford Adil Hussain in your movie. So that kind of things, because not everyone will say that this is for art, right? Like he said. So how do you balance that?
I think there is no excuse to want to create, right? The act of creating is a survival act. You have to create because you have to survive. And for you to survive, you have to create. And I'm saying this in the context of when even the wheel was invented. Or for that matter, when the hummingbird makes its nest. Other people will look at it as art. But for a lot of people, it is survival. And for me especially, I'm saying survival not just in terms of food or sustenance. I'm saying survival also in the context of a certain kind of mental space, The world is a terrible place. Let's admit that. But how do we imagine a better place? How do we reimagine a world that functions according to how you want to function or how you imagine the world to be? Art gives you that refuge. Be it music, be it films, be it poetry, be it storytelling. Art gives you that refuge. And yes, sometimes it is not commercially lucrative. And I can say this with a certain amount of authority because, I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I've done my fair share of extremities with regards to being able to survive in this field. Meghalaya does not have an ecosystem like Bollywood or other filmmaking production atmospheres that you would find in the South. I think I would safely say that no one starves. And it sounds extreme. No one starves. And are you willing to starve for what you believe in? I think that has kept me going. And also at the same time, because I'm a father of an 8-year-old daughter, and I see that all of those creative things that I've learned in film school, in life, are also employed in raising this child, And the reason why I bring this up is because once again, I go back to your creative act is a survival act, So what you learn in film school, one should not just consider themselves as these egoistic, because artists can be very egoistic, right? I bear the burden of the world upon my shoulders and no one understands me. I'm the only one who understands the world. But I think that, artists should also, creative people should also be more humble, and say I don't understand the world. But, I'm not the only one who's suffering. Other people are also suffering. And it will be all right. Everything will work out. Live in the moment, be in the present, live in the moment, and everything will work out. And be it whatever you do, and also patience, And I think this is where I would go back to, being part of this agrarian community at one point of time. I mean, I wouldn't say I was a farmer, but 2 generations ago, the fact that we were an agrarian society, that act of patience, you will sow now and you will reap and harvest eventually after a point of time. There is no way in which you can speed up this process. And I think that act of patience, that act of being able to understand what time of the year it is, being able to take one day at a time. This is deeply rooted in our philosophy. And I'm not just saying the Khasi philosophy, the philosophy of the subcontinent as well, right? Everything takes its time, And I often tell this to, other young people that I mentor, that in Khasi they say, Pimtung, Yaudien, Sing, Bon Meat Not. Or in other words, you don't sow the seeds today for the fruit come out more. It is a long process, and that fruit will also grow depending on how you choose to nurture it, And it's important for us to guide that plant towards the light. So analogy overload, but yeah.
Okay, great. So now a lot of streaming platforms are coming. So Is it? And while growing up, I always remember filmmaking, film to us, we're going to the theater.
Yeah.
And now all these streaming platforms are there, and now less people are going to the theater, let's say.
Yes.
And they have access right at home, right? But it's also an opportunity for indigenous filmmakers to thrive, right? The whole K-drama scene which happens, right? Korea is known for other things, but now nobody expected that they blow up the scene of filmmaking or storytelling and all that. So similarly, do you think it gives great opportunity to the young filmmakers of Meghalaya?
Absolutely. I think that, especially in the technical field, right? Because, a lot of people just want to do camera, or they just want to do sound. They don't want to be director. They don't want to be screenplay writer. I think the technical space, it has really encouraged a certain kind of a production ecosystem. And like I said earlier on, a space such as this wouldn't exist 10 years ago. But being able to tap that creative potential that the local people have and monetize that, it's a huge step towards realizing that the creative industry is also one that can be capitalized, is one that we can see as a form of revenue generation, And young people in this space are just, like I said, so in tune in terms of the creative aspirations. We live in an era where we also have access to the kind of stuff that happens somewhere else across the world, and we're able to also replicate some of that kind of technical look of how a film should look, like a podcast. So this is a professional-looking podcast. I've been in other film studios, and I'm looking at all of this equipment, and I'm like, wow, I don't feel like I'm in Shillong, but I think that there is a realization of this potential. The next part of your question is with regards to cinema. Cinema is a very ritualistic space. You enter there, the lights are off. For the next hour or so, all of those different people are focused on one screen. And it's a very transcendental experience as well, because all of these different people are watching the same screen together, and they're interpreting the film based on their experiences. And it's also space that that does not discriminate. Everyone can go and watch a film. But I suppose in this day and age, to go to a cinema is also very, very expensive. It's not something that everyone can afford. Netflix, Amazon Prime, these platforms, of course, have their own flow charts of what they should put out there. It's very driven by consumer behavior. But I think like the Meghalaya OTT platform is gearing towards a great direction. They should be open to I would say exposing themselves to how these OTT platforms work. And I'm saying this because the other day someone called up and said, "Oh, but Wanphrang, I can't find your films on the OTT platform." And I said, go to Meghalaya OTT platform. It's there. Download the app. 5 people watch it. If you have, is it free? The app. It's free.
It's free.
So, great. So, but you have all of these films at your disposal. I was hoping that, I might get myself. I was hoping that it wouldn't be free, because if one person can subscribe, 5 people can watch it. Because, I love watching films together with other people, right? Because it's such a, like I said, ritualistic experience, and talk about the film and discuss the film after it's done. But anyways, now that I know it's free, there is no excuse for people not to download the app. But so apparently, like some of my films, 2 of my films that are meant to be there are not there. The first 2 parts of the trilogy, Before the Blood and the Border. So I hope that the people at the platform look into that as well, because I can't give free DVDs. Because the distribution system of films is also another minefield. But at one point of time, what I would do is that I would have a public screening at a hall. So, for example, like for the the First World War film, which is the second part of the trilogy, we had the screening at Khasi National Darbar, and I had pen drives and DVDs, and I said, look, just make copies, because these are films which also examine society, and I wanted people to watch them and engage in conversation. And beautifully enough, like some research scholars have reached out, and they're not from the film department, they're from sociology background, anthropology background. They've reached out and said, we want to do research on some of the subjects that you've covered, like where can I get access to these materials? So one should also imagine that films are not just for the sake of entertainment, which is important, but also making people think, making people question things that they take for granted. So platforms such as that is a great avenue for a lot of people from Meghalaya, and I would urge them to make those films accessible to people outside the state as well, because as of right now, I can't access those films when I'm elsewhere. I can't access the Hello Meghalaya online platform and when I'm in a different country. So I think they're still working on that. But also equally important is that sometimes it's quality, not quantity.
Yeah.
Quality, not quantity. And I'm not saying this to discourage, people who want to make other kinds of films, create all kinds of films. But at the same time, how do these films also encourage a society that we imagine one to be, So being cautious of, especially being gender sensitive, I think that's a very important factor when I watch a lot of local films, Being gender sensitive, being sensitive towards other people, other communities. We all have a huge responsibility as content creators to also be aware of what we put out there. So, yeah.
Great. Technical skills. You have, you can edit. I think you know a lot of tools. You know a lot about cameras, stuff like that. To a filmmaker or to a storyteller rather, because now people have always the option of outsourcing all these things. So they need not know all these technical skills. So why did you learn, and then how important they are for a storyteller?
There is no shortcut with regards to that regard. Yes, in fact, even AI, you can upload your film and it can cut your interview for you, and I tried it once, and I was like, this is, that human element, that emotion is just, but I'm not completely averse to AI of that matter, like outsourcing, for example. We don't have a proper DI colorist in the state of Meghalaya. So I work with this extremely talented, beautiful, wonderful colorist based in Bombay. And her name is Devanshi Desai, and she's done all the big Bollywood films. And she says, anytime you make a film, I love to color your film, because that color palette that you find in Meghalaya is so beautiful. It's so unique, and you give me the creative freedom to work a certain way. So unfortunately, a lot of these professions have to be outsourced because we don't have the skill set here as yet, And when I say that, I mean to say even like a 5.1 mixing studio. You might have the technical requirements, but at the end of the day, you also would need a conceptualizer. So the difference between a conceptualizer and a technician, so a technician can operate the camera. Conceptualizer is he gets a mobile phone or she gets a mobile phone and does a wonderful, fantastic film. And I urge people from the state of Meghalaya who want to be filmmakers, make a long documentary, do a 45-minute documentary. Don't do a short film. Don't do short films are too. Please do not do a music video if you want to be a director. Do a 45-minute film about anything and shoot it yourself and edit it yourself. Don't say, I need this lens, that lens. Shoot with whatever you have, be it your phone, be it your small DSLR camera. Don't ask for a Cine Prime lens or a 4K ARRI camera. I'm not intimidated by the technology. But the point that I'm trying to get at is, what makes a film is not the equipment, the story. It is the story that drives. It's the meat. It is the research. So make a film about your father. Make a film about your younger sibling and how they go to school. Document what they do every day. Make a film about how wonderful it is to, I'm trying to think off the top of my head without propping anyone, walking in Meghalaya.
Yeah.
What do you see?
I look forward to you making something on walking.
No, I mean, I can tell you if you probably have the resources, but what do you see every day when you walk from point A to point B in Meghalaya by 5 aspiring directors? 30-minute film, 45-minute film, 45-minute films about what you see walking from Meghalaya from point A to point B. And it doesn't have to be profound, it doesn't have to just be touristy. It could be the lady that you encounter at the bus stop, but make it truthful. Make it, make it as true. I'm cautious of the word truthful. But when I'm saying truthful, what I'm trying to say is that, don't try to be anything else. Why is it that this place is unique? What makes this place unique? Focus on those things, So, do a 45-minute documentary and no excuse. Make it on the people make it about the shopkeeper next to your house. Make it about the different dogs in your neighborhood. Make it about the different pets that, your family members have. It doesn't have to be profound to be art, The most the most exciting things that will be told to you in front of the camera are by the people who you share a special relationship with, because the moment you put a camera on, people tend to perform. But after a point of time, if you keep plonking that camera up, they're going to be like, they forget about it, and they shed that performance, So if someone can do that, that would be the best way to fashion themselves as a director.
You used the word colorist. So that's so because it's a career podcast, can you describe what it is?
Okay. So I'll not go into the history because that'll be another...
Just briefly.
Briefly. So we shoot, in today's day and age, we shoot certain kinds of film in this format called log, which has a color gamut, or it has contrast ratio, which is extremely pronounced, which means that when a colorist, it's so funny because they spell it the American way, COLORIST, and I get really, anyways. So the person will sit in front of this footage, and then alongside the director, and the director will say, okay, I want this to be colored a certain way, or in other words, please enhance this color, or can you bring down the saturation? Can you make this scene lighter or brighter? Because if I make it darker, it'll look more ominous. Can you enhance the colors of this scene? Because I want this scene to have, a certain effect on people, because colors affect how people perceive a scene, and it works at the level of subconscious, You've just reminded of a quick anecdote as well. So when we were coloring for Lorni, I said, please enhance the reds and the yellows, because those are the colors that I see quite often in amongst the Khasi people. And I think this is when you asked me what is the parting note for young people in Meghalaya.
Yeah, so now I want you to, keeping in mind that this podcast is mostly watched by youth and students, and among them some may aspire to become a filmmaker. So one part is that how do they discover that, like you discovered, how do they discover that they are truly, a storyteller or filmmaker? And once they have discovered, what should they do when they are in school and when they are in college? And what kind of education should pursue so that long term they can pursue this career of filmmaking?
Just 1 second. I'm just writing that down because I'm trying to be precise and okay. That's a very important question because like I said early on, the government sector is quite saturated in terms of the traditional jobs, and young people are looking at other avenues to not just be creative, but also to generate income. Everyone needs to run a kitchen. I think that, and this might sound very extreme, are you willing to starve for what you love? Are you willing to go that extra mile for what you love? And I think that if that answer is yes, then how do you start working towards not starving? Yeah. And I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but what I can safely say is that be aware of other people's culture. The whole world is out there. There is no excuse for you to want to know more about what's happening around the world. Use the tools at your disposal. The internet is a beautiful place for you to discover so many different things. Make conversations with people who are not from your community. Get an understanding of where these people come from. Get an understanding of their cultural identity. Learn, as opposed to figuring out how you're different from this person. Find out how much you share with this person. What are the common cultural overlaps? Because we're so busy building bridges that we forget that we should. Forgive me. We are so busy building walls, when in fact we should be emphasizing on building bridges and treating other people the way we want to be treated, being able to be creatures of empathy, being able to understand that the creative process can only thrive if we respect other people. And like I said, once again, be proud of who you are. We are blessed with so many different stories, and those stories can be used for podcasts, they can be used for films, they can be used for teaching. But be proud of who you are without being arrogant or egoistical, and always respect people around you. So yeah, thank you. And do not litter in Shillong.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that.
So this episode was about a filmmaker, a storyteller. I know I have met many students who want to pursue this because this is about creativity and we all want to express ourselves in one form or the other. When it comes to filmmaking, it's also, there are so many other associated things by the role of colorist and videographer and the production and the editing. There's so many associated things wherein also people are required. I think in Meghalaya, it is coming up in a big way. We have our own app now. We have a platform. I think it's time we replace K-drama with M-drama. See you in next episode. Thank you. Publishabun Mithila.
Thank you.